Hello everyone, welcome to the Weeb initiative. I'm your host, the Weeb. This is a show where every other week I'll be talking about anime, manga, and everything in between. This week I'll be talking about following the last episode where I talked about the classic Mahou Shoujo genre. This week I'll be talking about as I call it, the Modern Mahou Shoujo. And to this end, I'll be talking about the flagship of everything that has to do with this new, let's say, this modern take on the Mahou Shoujo genre, Puella Magi Madoka Magica, or Mahou Shoujo Madoka, to be pretty simple. I don't know why they put a lot of Italian, I think it's Italian, in the anime. I don't know why, and from what I could research, I don't actually know why that is, outside from stylistic choice, but whatever. Before I even start, let's start with the disclaimers. First disclaimers. Spoiler alert, I'll be talking about everything in the anime, so the 12 episodes it has. I'll not be talking about the films or the spin-offs or the ones that came after. Mostly because the movies, the films are not really canon, in my humble opinion. And also talking about the spin-offs is still coming out, so that's not really feasible for me to review it. And also because I want to talk about the genre itself, focusing on the anime. So that's basically it. The second thing, spoiler alert, about the spoiler alert, right? There is a kind of plot twist by the end of the anime that really changes the perspective and the narrative in most cases. But in my opinion, it's so well explained in the anime that it kind of doesn't. I don't actually need to regard it as something that moves the plot, because it kind of does, but at the same time it's so late in the game that the outcome is more or less already about to happen either way. And also because I think at the end of the day the review is going to be better, and not only the review but the introduction to the genre is going to be better if I talk about the ending more than I talk about the plot twist, because the ending, weirdly enough, is something that accompanies the genre more or less. Sometimes, not every time, but sometimes. And so for considering all that, I will spoil everything from the anime. So that's that. Outside from that, there are no extra disclaimers, I think. Anyways, let's just start. So first off, let's start with the stats. So I would just call it Madoka, because Madoka is so much simpler than the full name, and Mahou Shoujo Madoka is also 3 words. So let me cut to the chase, right? So Madoka is originally an anime written by Urobushi Gen. The music is done by Kajiura Yuki. The music score on this thing is so awesome. The whole thing, the opening, the ending, the in the middle songs, they're awesome. All of them. The themes from the characters and everything else. Oh my god, it's awesome. I'll talk more about that later, but anyways, the studio that did it is the studio Shaft. Shaft is a studio who did Bakemonogatari, Megakushi Actors, and so on and so forth. I don't actually remember much of their work outside from those two, but Bakemonogatari and in the Monogatari series in itself is so, let's say, so big that, and has such a footprint that I don't actually think I need to explain much more of that. The original run of the anime was from January 2011 to April 2011. It has 12 episodes and a whole bunch of movies, as I already said, and the spin-off and some games and the manga adaptation and whatever. That being said, let's start with the both, not only the presentation of the genre, but let me start with the story, because the story will, let's say, it will be the basis to the genre. And so let's go. The first thing, especially for Madoka itself, let's say its successors, the descendants from the same genre don't actually have this feature, but Madoka is especially regarded by the visual design. Not only the visual design, but one of the most striking things about it is the visual design. The anime has so much style, so much, not only on the art style, the tracing, the character design and whatever, but also the way that the photography is presented, the scenes are presented, the character movement, animation, the whole as I said in some reviews past, the whole composure of the anime is quite unique, and I can't really explain this too much, but it's something akin to a modernist more kind of view. It has a lot of color and yet has some weird shape in some places. Some parts are pretty symbolic in some instances. I can't actually, let's say, I can't actually explain it in audio. You have to watch it to actually see it, but easy to say, it's one of the most visually unique anime you will ever see, and mostly because they just went all out with this one. I don't actually know the real reason, but they just went all out. And I mean, it's not so much, let's say, close to, as I already said, the same studio did it. It's not so much closer to Bakemonogatari, the Monogatari series, and Mekakushi Actors, but it's the same DNA, although it came, I think, after Bakemonogatari, but before the other ones. But at the same time, it has the same DNA, but it is quite unique in between it. That being said, we get to meet the first thing in the episode, we get to meet our main character, Kanade Madoka, who is a normal schoolgirl, I think 14 years old, and we accompany her in her everyday life for the first episode, more or less. So we get to meet her mother, little brother, her father, her two, let's say, best friends at the time. She studies in a co-ed school, but for the most of the anime, there are no interactions with boys. There's one boy who becomes, let's say, a turning point in the story for one of the girls, but I will talk about that later. The two girls that we meet is Hitomi and Sayaka. Hitomi, for the sake of this review, she's not really important in the beginning. I mean, she's not really important overall, but at some point she becomes like a plot point, let's say. And Sayaka, who is, let's say, the best friend of Madoka. And for the first day, we get to see that there's a transfer student named Homura Akemi, who she has this really, her presence is noticeable, and she straight out comes out as the antagonist, not the villain, but the antagonist too. Let's say we see from the get-go that Madoka is really innocent, really kind, really happy and whatever, and for the most part Homura exhales the opposite energy. She's cold, she's calculated, but let's just say she's bad. she's mean. Let's just put the blanket statement. She's mean for the most part at the beginning, and for one reason or another, she has this back and forth with Madoka, and basically from the get-go, it doesn't seem like she wants to be friends with Madoka. Although Madoka does not, let's say, decline Homura as a friend, she just she's afraid of Homura, but not so much to reject her at this point. And basically, from this point on, right, so the first episode, we get to see Madoka and Sayaka basically live their normal lives all together and whatever. But at some point, they go to the shopping mall, and for one reason or another, a mysterious voice starts to come into Madoka's head, asking for help. And when she goes to investigate, and this already becomes something that the anime does a lot. The changing environment really happens, and this is a detail, right? But it is a scene that really just locks it in. The amount of weight, the background in this scene is actually holding the whole anime. That first off, the Sayaka and Madoka are in this really bright and colorful shopping mall and whatever. And when Madoka comes to help this mysterious voice, she enters in this back room kind of maintenance passage, really dark, really black and gray, and the whole, as I said, the whole composure is really something to behold in this anime. But let's get going. So they found out the mysterious voice is actually a little animal that is being chased by Homura. Homura is actively trying to kill it, and she comes out of the shadow and warns them that the animal she's holding, let's call it an animal at this point, the animal she's holding is not to be trifled with. Does not don't be tempted by its offer and whatever. She doesn't actually say exactly that, but you know what I'm saying. From this point on, they actually talk to this animal, and its name is Kyubey, and from then on we get to the whole thing. So Kyubey basically explains that there is this concept of the witches and whatever, and eventually, for one reason or another, Madoka and Sayaka get involved with a witch. And basically the explanation is a witch is manifestation of hate, basically hatred, human hatred, that affects its surroundings. So basically it can affect other people into not only hurting others but hurting themselves. So some of the themes and this is a side note but important one, the themes in this anime are pretty heavy. They're pretty heavy, but they try to gloss over some things, even though, as I already said and I will repeat, the themes are pretty heavy, from suicide to death, and it is pretty emotional story, and it becomes even more emotional and more involved as the story goes on. So as always, viewer discretion, if you guys know what I'm saying. I mean, I'm not the censorship board or whatever, you do you, but I'm just saying, I had a case once that an anime shook me so much that I actually got bummed out for a week, so in a really bad way. But the thing is, right, so I would just say the ending for this story is a good ending, and I'll get to that. But again, themes are heavy, tread carefully, let's say. So for whatever reason, Sayaka and Madoka get kind of involved into a witch's curse, as they call it. They get inside its field of influence, its barrier, and they get locked in, but they are saved by one girl from their school's third year. They are on the second year, so the third year, their senpai, Tomoe Mami, who is already a magical girl, and for the most part, from this point on, Tomoe Mami is basically their mentor for, let's say. So she comes out to save Kyubey and save the girls from this witch, and then from this point on, she basically takes them under her wing, because she needs to explain how being a magical girl works. So in broad terms, let's say, the thing that Kyubey adverts is that he will grant you any wish, any impossible wish is made possible, but in exchange the girl has to basically they earn this soul gem that represents their soul, and they have to fight these witches, who at this point are just these manifestations of hatred. The witches are characterized in the anime as these basically really abstract beings, let's say. They have a whole different kind of animation. They really change how the whole show feels, because the show is half, when a witch is in the screen, the show is half anime and half whatever they wanted to do, as symbolic as ever. So some are collages of figures of, one of them I think it's butterflies made out of paper and whatever, and another one is just like kids drawings on with like crayons and whatever, and it's all really well animated. It's a visual spectacle at this point, and basically the whole thing revolves around killing witches after getting one wish granted. So Mummy just explains to the girls the way that things work, and takes them into some fights and whatever, just to show them how things work, more or less. And from this point on, they basically develop this really nice friendship, although the stakes are different for each other. But Mummy basically explains that her wish was done out of, let's say, immediate necessity, because she survived a car crash, so she had to accept the wish. When I say wish, the Kyubey uses the word contract a lot when you say that, and the word contract really veers the whole symbology of this thing, because later on we get to know the fine lines of the wish granting, the contract really, and then we see that a wish that is granted by an angel is a contract with the devil and whatever. And this is a really symbolic thing, but it really comes out. And I'm already spoiling something that happens way later, but anyways, the thing is, they befriend Mummy, and in episode 3, she unceremoniously dies after teaching both Madoka and Sayaka that dying is part of being a Mahou Shoujo. And this really, let's just say, the scene is pretty heavy, and the whole thing just gets wrecked from then on. The whole thing, the psychological damage, emotional damage, the whole thing gets wrecked from this point on, because from that point on, Sayaka and Madoka, who were considering becoming magical girls, they view it as this: why would I risk my life with this kind of thing, right? So they start to weigh their options, really. That being said, there are like, so this happens on episode 3. There are like, I think, 2 episodes in between it until we are shown one part of Sayaka's life more on focus, that she has boy that is her childhood friend, who would used to be prodigy violinist, and they never actually show the why, but he for some reason survived an accident and has been immobile in both hands and feet for the last, I don't know, 6 years. And so Sayaka religiously goes to his hospital room every day to speak with him, to show him rare music CDs she finds and buys, and humor him. Basically, for the last 6 years she did that. And then when we get to actually focus on that, he lashes out at some point at her, and on a whim she turns to Kyubey. And Kyubey, I have to actually give this disclaimer already. Kyubey is a magical creature, true and true. So he teleports. He is basically omnipresent from everything we can see, and he basically teleports, grants wishes, and later on is a bit of a motherfucker, but I'll get to that. And basically, she on a whim looks at the window, Kyubey appears, and then she goes somewhere and makes the contract. In between this happening, Madoka is going home, really is still depressed that mommy died, and finds Hitomi in the middle of the street. And when she sees Hitomi, she notices that Hitomi is marked with what they call the kiss of a witch. So she's basically under the influence of the curse. And when she sees it, there are a whole lot of people trying collective suicide. And fucked up, right? Fucked up. And at some point, Madoka basically stops them, but then they pursue her into a separate room of the building they're on. And when the witch actually appears and tries to take Madoka, Sayaka comes out with her newfound magical girl powers, and she saves her and whatever. And from this point on, we enter the Sayaka arc. The Sayaka arc is really rough. The Sayaka arc is really difficult to watch, because it's when we discover so much about being a magical girl, and we see the psychological damage that it has on the users that actually discover it. So one of the first things that happen after Mami dies is that there's this new girl who appears, that's Kyoko, and for all intents and purposes, if Madoka and Sayaka, and Mami for that matter, were thinking about saving people and actually living for the sake of saving people they love, people they care about, and the city in general, Kyoko is basically the min-maxer of the whole magical girl business. So what do I mean by that, right? So for one reason or another, there are basically two mechanics they have to live with. Magical girls have their soul gem, and their soul gem represents their soul. The thing is, their magical power is represented by their soul gem, and their soul gem becomes, let's say, dirty or soiled or whatever you want to call it. They become darker, and there's a darkness that spreads whenever they use their powers. The more you use it, the more dark it becomes. At this point, it is not actually questioned what happens if it becomes full black, but it is known that you don't want to actually have it happen. That being said, how do you cleanse your soul gem? So every time they kill a witch, the witch will drop what they call a grief seed, that is its heart, more or less, let's say. And the grief seed, when put next to a soul gem, will leach out the corruption from the soul gem into itself. Most of the grief seeds have one use, some have more uses, but the fact of the matter is you need grief seeds to cleanse your soul gem. The thing is, it is added that some witches that are too powerful may spawn what they call familiars, that are witches by their own right, but they don't actually have the same amount of power, and they don't drop, crucially, the grief seed. That being said, if you think about it, there's no gain in actually killing the familiar because there are no drops. The only way that a familiar will drop a grief seed is if it kills more people in the real world. So that's the thing. So the whole conflict between Kyoko and Sayaka, and this is wholly about Sayaka and Kyoko, is that Kyoko believes that leaving a familiar be and killing some people to become a full-fledged witch is better than killing the familiar before it with no drops. And Sayaka truly despises that notion because it will kill people, and you being able to stop it, you should stop it. And so that's the basic first conflict between them, and it's the first time that at this point, with Mami out of the picture, Sayaka and Madoka have to see two magical girls fight, each with their own perspective, because Madoka at this point is not a magical girl, and Sayaka is basically a newbie. She doesn't know actually how to fight, and they fight it out. It is pretty painful. It's something really, really awful, and eventually even Homura has to intervene because she, and this is the first hint of the let's say the plot twist. Homura sees that Madoka is suffering, seeing her friend and someone she doesn't actually have anything against fight for no reason, because in Madoka's word of view, if there are two magical girls, they should ally themselves to defeat the witches. Let's say the only thing that a magical girl should fight is a witch, because the witch actually harms people, and magical girls should be allies in itself. That being said, Kyoko then drags it out with the fight and whatever, and this goes on a bit. The thing is, right, so skipping a bit, I think the first big break of Sayaka's, let's say, mental state at this point, after having lost, after getting pushed around by another magical girl who is not in accordance with what a magical girl should be, Sayaka accidentally discovers that if your soul gem gets farther than 100 meters from your body, you basically lose control of your body. And that's when actually Kyubei has this whole exposition about the fact that when you make a contract, when the wish is granted, your soul is basically locked into the soul gem. That is a way better form to protect it, because it's the most important part of the magical girl, and so your body is not actually your own anymore. You are just, let's say, transmitting your thoughts and personality through an unoccupied body, more or less a corpse, but not really. And from this point on, the whole show starts to really break down, because then we get to the question of what actually is a human. Are the girls who don't actually have bodies anymore actually human, or they're something else? And given that Sayaka had the aspiration to live a normal life with what would eventually be a special order and have kids and whatever, and live life as you were, will she be able to do that? That's the whole question here. And from this point on, the whole thing with Sayaka really begins to crumble, because from this point on, we get to see that Sayaka actually, there's this whole thing about the losing your body, being a zombie and whatever kind of stuff. The second thing is when it comes out that actually Hitomi, the other friend from the beginning, she comes out and says to Sayaka, actually, I like the boy you were seeing for the 6 years, and now that he's out of the hospital, I'll confess to him. Is that alright with you? And this hits really hard out of nowhere, and Oh boy. And I mean, we don't actually get to see the exchange. We get to see they're talking, but we don't actually know what they talk about and the answer. But it becomes somewhat of, let's say, tactfully express that he responds positively to her feelings, so they start actually to date, and that really hits Sayaka really low at this point, really low. And from this point on, the whole thing just goes downhill from here. So later on, we get to see that Sayaka fighting witches. She starts to use the, let's say, the knowledge of being away from your body to disconcern the pain that she feels. And so she bangs up her whole body through the fight, and heals it afterward. But that uses a whole lot of magic, and for no particular reason really, she refuses to take the grief seed that she drops for no real reason. And at this point, her soul gem is really polluted, and she just refuses to do anything. And so there's this whole, let's say, there's, I don't know, like 5-minute montage of the way that she's looking at the world at this point, because although she can fight witches, she doesn't see the objective anymore. She is basically in despair. She's basically hopeless at this point. And that's when we get to see the second big secret, the second thing, is that despair and hopelessness, hatred, curses, whatever you want to call it, they are the basis of the corruption that accumulates in the soul gem of the magical girls. So basically, that's the first thing, the hate, the hopelessness. This let's say something that mounts on the real fact, the real secret that at this point Kyubey had not talked about. Whenever soul gem gets fully corrupted, it becomes a grief seed, and the girl becomes a witch. And long story short, Sayaka becomes a witch. And this really hits Madoka really hard. And not only that, but for the sake of, and I'm glossing over some things here, right? So there's this whole arc where Kyoko and Sayaka make up for the sake of, they start to understand each other more or less. But Sayaka is already on the Joker arc of the I don't care about the world and whatever, and so it's too late to save her. But the thing is, right? So Kyoko goes to Madoka, and both of them try to, let's say, save Sayaka, try to see if Sayaka wakes up from her witch form. She doesn't, and Kyubey knew that, but didn't tell anyone about it, because eventually Kyoko, to defeat Sayaka, Kyoko dies, and that leaves on just Homura and Madoka at the end of the day. And Kyubey eventually comes out and says that at this point we know that there is a huge witch that is coming to town eventually. I don't actually remember the name right now. The name is in goddamn German, and I don't know German. Something like that. The thing is, when the thing manifests, a lot of people will die. Basically, it is a witch that causes what we would see as natural disasters. So a giant earthquake, a tornado, something of the kind. And we know that because Homura, for some reason at this point, knows that. And it is known that no one magical girl can defeat it, so they need more hands to do it. And at this point, there are no magical girls able to do it, because all of them are dead, and Madoka has yet to make a contract. That being said, it comes out that Homura actually doesn't actually want Madoka to become a magical girl. She does not at this point, when Kyoko dies, explain the reason, but simple to say that she doesn't want to to make Madoka, doesn't want to let Madoka become a magical girl because she doesn't want her to suffer the difficulties of being a magical girl. Because and this is the thing that they don't actually explain, but you need to actually make this, let's say, this head count from the beginning, when the whole thing about becoming a witch comes into perspective. So for all we know, all the witches are born from magical girls. So let's say for one witch there was a magical girl, but there were no witches to begin with, right? So the first witch was created because the first magical girl became too corrupted, and the cycle continued and continued and continued. So it stands to reason that at some point are either too many magical girls for too little witches, if that makes sense. The thing is, the supply and demand is not, let's say, the supply and demand is not in equilibrium, and so there are a whole lot of more magical girls than there are witches, so there are not enough witches to cleanse all the soul gems. And even if there were, people would use their powers differently, in a different rate. So it's safe to assume that the magical girl came before the witch. And in layman's terms, it basically means that if you become a magical girl, your end game is to become a witch, if you want it or not, either because there are no grief seeds to cleanse your soul gem infinitely, or eventually you will become desperate and hopeless and corrupt it yourself. And Homura doesn't want that to Madoka. And then we start the last, after Kyoko dies and this whole thing basically blows over, we start the last arc of the story. And on episode 10, we get the whole explanation of who is Homura as one of the most important, let's say, late arriving, more or less, characters in the whole show. So it is explained that actually Homura was a normal girl who entered the school and eventually was presented to the world of magical girls through Madoka and Mami. And basically the whole anime, there's one whole episode to show this, but Homura relives the same 1 month of being transferred into the school, getting to meet Madoka, getting to meet Sayaka, getting to meet Mami, getting to meet everyone, and she relives this 1 month for any number. They show, I think it's 7 or 8 times the different outcomes, and it always comes back to the same thing. To Homura watches Madoka die and goes back to the past to try to redo it, and every time she fails, and at this point and this is something that happens really early in the anime, that Kyubey admits that for some unknown reason Madoka is the most powerful magical girl ever, or she would be if she formed the contract, but he doesn't know why. And then we get the explanation from Kyubey later on that because that Homura has redone the same event centered into Madoka, for some reason the universe basically centered so much of what they call the karmic destiny into Madoka that she has the magical potential of let's say the infinite, more or less. She's if she becomes a magical girl, she would be infinitely powerful, and when she if she becomes a witch later on, she would be infinitely powerful to destroy the whole universe. Kinda, I think it's the whole universe they say, or the whole planet. The thing is, it's pretty grand, and so we come to the standstill because Homura tries to kill the Worshbringer. I don't actually remember the name of the damn thing, and she fails. And then she comes into the dreadlock of thinking that she either restarts the month again and see herself fail again, and sums up to the possible suffering of Madoka, and then she starts to becomes desperate. But at this point, Madoka steps up and she concocts the perfect wish to become a magical girl, to solve all the suffering she's seen. And one thing that I didn't say yet, there's a whole lot of crying in this anime. There's a whole lot of suffering, whole lot of crying. It is really emotional. I cried a lot too. But the thing is, right, at this point, Madoka, after crying a lot and a lot and a lot, and suffering a lot, and seeing people suffer too, not only herself, but a lot of people, because at this point when Sayaka dies, the whole thing just, oh my god, it's terrible. The thing is, at this point, Madoka brings up the solution, and she just makes the one ending to an anime that is really confusing if you don't follow up the whole dialogue, because it is really quick. Madoka, at the end of the fight with the word purges, with Homura almost dying and almost losing faith and becoming a witch, Madoka wishes to rewrite the laws of why the witches exist, and basically she destroys any witch before it is born, and with that she turns herself into a concept. Not that she rewrites the laws of the physics of the universe in the whole anime, but she becomes a new law that rewrites it all. And so there is this whole thing that she wishes to erase all the witches that were and that will be and that are at this point. And with that, the whole timeline is redone in a way that any magical girls from the past, they don't actually become witches, and they don't actually curse them. They vanish rather than becoming a witch and killing people. And so she saves generations after generations of humans. And not only that, but she actually, by doing that, she basically redoes the whole thing. So the one exception that doesn't actually, let's say, is reborn is Sayaka, because Sayaka's death is made in order to complete her wish. Because I'm talking about something that you need to actually watch the anime. I didn't actually explain it, and I will not take the time to explain because it's been 15 minutes of recording already. But the thing is, at this point, Madoka, in this godlike state of becoming a very law of physics, she comes to this connection with Sayaka from the dead, and they agree to maintain Sayaka's wish in exchange for her life, because for her wish was something to help someone else. The result of the wish was better in the long run, let's say, for the person. So if there were no wish, the person affected would not be, there would be this hopeless and despair. Not that he was a magical girl, not that, but the thing is, she basically maintains her wish, and doing that, Sayaka stays dead, but all the other girls are basically reborn, and the timeline is remade in a way that Homura actually becomes friends with Mami and Kyoko, and Madoka actually stops existing, let's say. And the only person at the end of the day that remembers the whole thing as it happened is Homura, because Homura has the ability to, she has time-space magic, which in turn lets her basically communicate with Madoka before she actually becomes a law of physics, more or less. It's pretty abstract, but I think I did a good job at explaining it, I hope. The thing is, this is about the anime, right? I have to still talk about the genre and later on my opinion. But basically, what I told you is basically a story about being tricked into, let's say, a false hope, and then finding hope into the despair and being desperate, and having the whole thing blow over, and seeing people who would be allies who should be allies to fight, and a whole lot of stuff. What I want to do now is to present 2 examples. I will present 2 examples because I don't actually know any other. I will present 2 examples of the same genre, the modern Mahou Shoujo genre, just to let's say present the way that Madoka actually influenced the industry in a way. Just a side note, there is this it's not a spin-off, it's not the sequel, but it is, let's say, the successor to Madoka is Lyrical Nonoka, which is a really lighter note on this modern. It has some heavy stuff, but not in the size that Madoka has, and not really well made as Madoka is, but that's just a side note. The 2 that I want to talk about is first Mahou Shoujo Site and Magical Girl Raising Project. Both of them are terrible anime that I don't actually want to review, and I will tell you why. For sake of brevity, I don't actually remember the difference between one another. The thing is, they both strain from the same. They're both pieces of the same cloth, more or less. I'll talk more about Mahou Shoujo Site because it's the one that I remember most. Mahou Shoujo Site is a terrible take on the modern Mahou Shoujo genre, because it begins with the main girl, and this is really brief, right? The main girl suffers bullying in the school. She, for some reason, gets presented this gun that teleports people. But the thing is, when she uses the gun, and this is more like a gun toy, right? A toy gun, something akin to a Nerf, more or less. And the thing is, whenever she shoots the gun at someone, they get transported to where? To the front of a train. And this is pretty terrible. The whole show is pretty terrible. The whole show is about suffering and death and suffering. It's terrible. And the thing is, right? So in Mahou Shoujo, Magical Girl Raising Project is kind of the same, because they basically start with the modern Mahou Shoujo setting with saving people and whatever, but it later becomes Mahou Shoujo Battle Royale, which is pretty violent, really violent, for no reason. And the it is not really well written, either of them. But the one thing that they have in common, and this is a recurring thread, is that at some point there is this big storm, the equivalent to what I said, the word purges is in Madoka. There is an equivalent, and this is I'm talking really briefly and really presenting these 2 cases, really glossing over a lot of things. But the thing is, the Modern Mahou Shoujo is not really well represented after, I don't know, 2017. I think it's when the last one released. Really, outside from that, we could say that Mahou Shoujo in itself, the let's say the cutesy, hopeful, idealistic ideal of the Mahou Shoujo, the girl that's uses magic to save people with the whole thing, the whole uses dresses, the transformation scene and whatever. From Sailor Moon, that was the original classic Mahou Shoujo, to Madoka, the ideas come, let's say, they come together. They actually are the same thing, but Madoka puts on so many twists on the original idea that you could say it's a separate genre, the classic and the modern. That's why I personally like to distinguish them. And also because from the classic to the modern, there are the ones that live in the between, let's say. There are the ones that have a lot of suffering, whereas And the suffering is something that is more or less an abstract concept, but the when you watch Sailor Moon, for example, as the best example I can give, Sailor Moon doesn't actually lose a battle, and doesn't actually see anything happen to her. The stakes are low because they always win, and I'm not saying this is bad. This is just different. But the thing that Madoka, one of the things that Madoka adds to the genre is the idea that the power is not for free, and in so doing, the cost is translated into, let's say, the mental, emotional strain that it leaves in the user of the powers. And as I was saying, right? So back to what I was saying, the ones that live in the middle are some things like Fate Kaleiji Prisma Liner Idia, which has a lot of emotional sadness beats, but ultimately is pretty cutesy, pretty idealistic, pretty happy, and has a happy ending in itself. And for another, Mahou Shoujo 2, Symphogear, which has a whole lot of suffering and emotional sadness, as in the first and second season especially are really heavy. The last season, kind of, we have the whole Tsubasa arc, it's pretty heavy. But the thing is, they're the ones that live in the middle. I would still call it the modern style of Mahou Shoujo because they still have the sadness building to it. But what I would like to say, just to set it up, is that Modern Mahou Shoujo is basically different from the original because they add a lot of complexity, a lot of emotions. They don't actually think that the good guys are necessarily the good guys. One of the things that Madoka does a lot, and Madoka is specific, the other two cases that I mentioned do not do this well because they are bad. Not slandering the authors or anything, I just think that the story is bad for myself. I don't like sad, depressing stories. That's just me. The thing is, Modern Mahou Shoujo basically adds on a whole lot of things, from not only the cost of power, the notion of the cost of power. They basically, Madoka in specific, destroys the idea of the manichaeism that we live in with this kind of episodic anime and manga that we watch and read. Manichaeism, if you don't know, is this not psychological notion, is this structure that we are presented with, where there are the good guys and the bad guys. So you would think that if Madoka followed the Manichaeist model, there would be only the good guys, the magical girls, and the bad guys, the witches. But as we see, it treads this line really freely, and basically just dismantles this whole model when the magical girls actually start to fight within their group. Because we don't actually see witches killing each other, but we see that magical girls kill each other a lot. And at some point, actually, when we get to see the Homura flashback episode on episode 10, there's a point where Mami kills Kyoko, and Mami, before killing Homura, Madoka kills her, and it's a whole mess. And this is a thing, right? So I think that this is a really good genre to study, let's say, to research. But I think the good examples are really scarce, let's say. As I already said, Mahou Shoujo site and Magical Girl Raising Program, if you want to be really depressed and really saddened, because there are no good in that story. It's all bad. It's all bad. Mahou Shoujo site specifically, I don't like it. I really don't like it. Anyways, so before I wrap up, let me just give my opinions on the anime itself. So, Mahou Shoujo Madoka. Man, rewatching it was was a treat. I can't really express it, but the visual spectacle is really nice. The animation is pretty well made. The fights, they are really characteristic. Each of the encounters is really remarkable, and even the encounters that we don't actually get to see in the, let's say, the main timeline, when we get only to see the flashback from Homura, they are really well made. The creativity that goes into the witches, into the character designs, into their powers and whatever else, man, it's really, really nice. Not only that, as I already said, the animation, the composure, the art style, the whole thing, awesome. The symbolism that happens from scene to scene, the ideas that they throw around, the little details on the scenes, the way they frame it, the things, really well made, really meticulous in its work. I don't actually think that I got all the details, really. I don't actually know if I got most of them, but they're really nice. And as I already said at the beginning, the music in this whole thing, the original soundtrack, really awesome. The opening is nice, but my god, the ending is superb. It's awesome. It's awesome. The whole anime is really nice to watch. The themes, if you can get beyond that, if you don't have a problem with it, please watch it. The whole experience is really nice. And that's basically it, I think. I will start rambling otherwise. So basically, that's basically it, right? If you like what I do, thank you for listening. If you like what I do, if you like the show, if you like my work, please like, please follow, please subscribe, depending on the platform you're in. Join the Discord, and if you can, share with a friend, share with anybody you can. And I hope you stick around. Bye.